Hi, it's Claire again, and this time we are going to spend the next 4 sessions looking at the English paper for the 11 plus GL assessment mainly. I'm going to go through all the different elements of the English test, just like I did with the maths. But today, our main focus is going to be upon comprehension, okay? And what we are going to look at specifically, test type and answer sheet. So we're going to have a brief overview of getting familiar with the test and the answer sheet again, just like we did with the maths. Then I'm going to look more specifically at comprehension. There's always going to be a comprehension element of the test, so that's important to understand the kind of things that you're required to do. And then I'm going to hone in on specific kinds of questions. Retrieval questions, where you've just got to find out something from the text. Author motives questions, so why has the author used a certain word or presented somebody in a certain way. Inference questions, where it's not explicitly told to you how to answer something, and word meanings. These are the main ones within comprehension. So though I'm going to base this around another GL assessment free paper, a familiarization one, actually these should be adaptable for every single paper that you do, every single test that you do. There should be these kinds of questions. So hopefully this should help you in all of the different ones. So this is session 1, and we're looking specifically at comprehension for this. I hope that you will find it useful. So we're going to start, as I said, by looking at the particular test type and answer sheet that you might have. It's very similar to the maths one that we looked at before. What I will say, though, is that the English often causes one of the most problematic parts for people. The reason being is that it has quite difficult questions in. You do need to be prepared for the fact that it is quite a difficult paper to do, okay? And the questions, though they, as you can see, I've picked some out here, are all A, B, C, D, E again, they still present problems because there's a lot of ones that catch you out and a lot of ways that they can try and catch you out. So let me show you what I mean. So I'm going to start by looking at the GL one like we've looked at before, and it's going to be in the same place as the previous maths one that you looked at before. So this is it here. This is my English one. I've gone for paper 1 again, okay? Now, when you look at it, it's exactly the same. Now, remember again that this is longer than an actual 11 plus test. Okay, so every section has got more questions in it, but it's a really useful gauge for looking at things. So here we have this. So I'm going to start by just talking you through the actual paper itself, and we'll go into more detail with specific parts. So here we are. We've got a comprehension. It's usually about a page and a half, 2 pages-ish, okay, of length. All right, so as you can see, it's going on a little bit here, and then it's going through, okay? Now, when we get to the bottom of the English part, or the comprehension part, sorry, we've got some grammar questions usually, which say things like, you know, what kind of word is that? What word class is it? All those kind of things. Then we get onto the spelling bit, which is here. And we have a punctuation bit and a grammar bit. Now, not all 3 of these will probably be in an 11 plus test, but we need to make sure that we're prepared for all of them. So we're going to go through those over the next few sessions, not all in one go today, because that will be a bit much. Okay, so let's move back to the comprehension section and let's have a look at our answer sheet. So the answer sheet looks very much like, funnily enough, the one that we have done for the maths. And again, you're putting your line in your box. So I don't need to go over that this time because you already know what to do with this. You're putting your line simply in the correct box again. Just make sure that, and this is quite important, if you choose to do the English test in a different order, and there is merit to doing so, that you then check which bit you're in, obviously. Okay, so you're not answering the spelling one in the wrong bit, okay, for example. It's just very straightforward, just goes through each of the sections here. So I've got my spelling bit, my punctuation bit, which are called hippos and performance time, but that's just for that paper. And then my comprehension, which is here. Okay. So in regards to how you would do this, how you would decide to do your paper, it really depends on your strengths. If you find the comprehension difficult, it can be really useful to actually start with the spelling punctuation bits first, because in some ways they are quicker marks to get. They don't require you to look through a big long text. They don't require you to really think about them particularly. You know, a lot of the time it's just finding a spelling error, finding a punctuation error. So we will go through those sections, obviously, but it might be worth thinking about where your strengths lie. And if you know you're going to find the comprehension difficult, as lots of children do, then it can be worth actually starting at those sections there, getting those marks banked so you've got them, and then starting a comprehension. But then it becomes really important with how you're going to fill in your answer sheet. So that's where it's worth practicing doing that beforehand. I would not just do that on the day. Okay, right, let's go through some of this. So what I'm going to try and do is show you some parts of the comprehension that we're looking at here, which is the Swiss Family Robinson. And then I'm going to look at, just picked out some different questions which kind of show the different parts of the test that you could have. So all the inference questions, retrieval questions, things like that. Then I'm going to tell you to get on with it up to a certain question, okay? I'm not doing the entire comprehension bit because I'm not going on to the grammar and word bit specifically. I'm going to do all the other parts that are the specific comprehension bit to do with the text. So that's just to kind of iron that out because that's a little bit more confusing. Anyway, what I would say with this, you decide when you get your paper how you are going to do it. If you spend the time and you only have a 25-minute block for most 11 plus with the English, if you spend a lot of time reading the paper, you are not going to be getting any marks because nobody gives you marks just for reading it. So you need to have a think about how you are going to approach the paper, what you are going to do. Personally, the way I suggest doing it is, unless you have very good memory and you can read really quickly, I wouldn't read all the way through it. These are quite long texts. You're not necessarily going to gain anything from that. And also, you're probably going to forget parts of it anyway by the time you get to the questions. So what I tend to do is go straight to the first question, work out what it's asking you. Generally, the first question is in the first part of the text, usually. Find the answer to that. But when you're doing that, you can be starting to read through so that as you're going through with each question, you're still actually reading the entire thing. Because the difficulty with not having read the entire thing is that you can end up in a situation where you're not able to answer those questions that talk about the text as an entirety. So that's why you still need to make sure you've read it all, but read it in chunks as you're answering the questions. That would be my best way of explaining how to do it. And that's how I tend to tell my tutees how to do it. Ultimately, it's up to you how you choose and how you work. And this is why actually doing a test under time conditions before you do the 11 plus is really important, to work out exactly what works best for you, to make sure that you complete the paper and you've answered every single question. Okay, right, let's have a look at the paper again. So the paper we're going to choose, as I say, is paper 1, and it is the Swiss Family Robinson, which is quite an old text. It often is an old text that's used with these. Therefore, I always tell my students that it would be a really good idea to read some of the old texts, because things like Swiss Family Robinson, for example, Secret Garden, Treasure Island, books like that, because it is a much easier way of being able to get used to the different kinds of things that you're going to see, the kinds of words, the terminology, how sentences are put together. They do often use older texts. Okay, so it's worth bearing that in mind, really, when you're coming to do this. Okay, so I'm just trying to find my right bit here, make sure that I have done it. Okay, here we are. So hopefully this is now showing my paper. Okay, so here we are with our English 1. I'm just going to double check that that's gone through okay. So hopefully you're in the same place as me and you're on to English 1 as well now. Right, here's our text. Like I said, we're not necessarily going to read the whole thing. However, I would read that very first introduction bit that's in there because that does give you a really good idea of where you're up to. So this story is told by a father who has been shipwrecked on an island with his wife and sons, Jack and Fritz, and their pet dogs. They have spent the winter safely in Falconhurst, which is the home that they built. The weather has recently improved, and it is time to find out what effect the winter storms have had on their treehouse and tents. Now, it's important to read that bit actually, because when you read that bit, it means that you can then have an idea about what's happening with it as a general thing. Now, what I'm going to do is, obviously with yours, you're going to be able to kind of have, and I would suggest you do this, one side of your desk with your paper on with the comprehension, and then one side with your questions on. So we're going to go straight to question 1, and I'm going to bring that up as well, hopefully now, and then that hopefully will go alongside, and here we are. Hopefully that can be seen. So we're literally going to go to question 1. I'm going to make these just match up a little bit so that I can show you both things at the same time. Okay, right. So here's the first bit and the first question. So the first question says, at what time of year is the passage set? So a nice, easy, sort of basically looking at retrieval question. You've got to find out what time of year it's set. However, there's always going to be little curveballs thrown in. If you were to just read that bit at the beginning, you can see that it says they have spent the winter safely in Falconhurst. Now, winter is one of our possible answers, but it's not winter now. And the reason being is that it says they have spent, so they haven't finished spending time there, okay? But then if you actually start to look at the bit here, I'm going to just highlight the bits I'm looking at over here. So if you actually look at the first bit, it very clearly tells you which season it is. Okay, so we've got obviously here the sun shot his bright rays through the clouds and it ceased to fall and the spring had come. I don't even need to read that full sentence. I will read the full sentence eventually, but that is thy bit there. Spring had come. Okay, so obviously for that one, you're going to have B. Nice, easy retrieval question to start with, but can be tricky if you've not read it properly. Okay, now, if you think about it, I will now have read up to spring had come. Okay, and therefore I've read the first part already. Okay, so what I tell my students to do is to then go to where they've done it. Okay, so we've read up to there, quick mark on there. I know I've read that bit. Then for the next question, for number 2, which we're not going to do at the moment because I want you to do some on your own, you could then start to look at the next part and read the next part until you come to an answer that will help you with question 2. And by that way, that means that you're then reading it in parts, using the bits that you find, but still you're managing to read it all as well. But in the meantime, you're also answering a question. You've got marked by that stage without having read the whole thing. So it tends to be, I think, one of the best ways of managing this. Right, let's have a look now at, and I actually want to leap right ahead with this and go down to question 21. okay, because this is another retrieval question. Now, you've kind of got to assume at this stage that we've read it all, obviously, but I'm just going to show you this because it's a good example of a question that you could have, okay? So I'm just going to move it back over here for a second. So, assuming we've read all of this, obviously, what was the reaction when Jack lost his crowbar? Okay, so we're going to go down to where that bit, we've read all this, we've answered some of those. We're going to go down to the crowbar bit, which I can see is here. Okay, so what was the reaction when Jack lost his crowbar? On the 10th day, as our persevering blows were falling heavily, Jack, who was hard with a hammer and crowbar, shouted, "Gone, Father Fritz, my bar has gone through the mountain. It went right through the rock. I heard it crash down inside. Oh, do come and see." Right through the rock. I heard it crash right down. We sprang to his side, and I thrust the handle of my hammer into the hole. I could turn it in any direction I chose. Fritz handed me a long pole. I tried the depth with that. Nothing could feel. A thin wall, then, was all that stood between us and a great cavern. Okay, so have we got to a part when he lost his crowbar? Let's double check a little bit further on and see where we are up to, okay, because he definitely has the crowbar here. On the 10th day, he was working hard with a hammer. Jack, who was working hard with a hammer and crowbar, shouted, "Gone, Father, my bar has gone through the mountain." Now, it doesn't say my crowbar, but it's referring to the crowbar. So it's at this point that the text is referring to. "Gone, Father Fritz, my bar." Now, that's the difficulty. You might be looking for the word crowbar. It doesn't say that my crowbar has gone or lost or anything like that. It says my bar has gone through the mountain. We've got to assume, given that there's no other part that refers to him losing his crowbar, that it's that bit. Why and how did he feel at this stage? What was his reaction? Okay, so let's see what his reaction was. And we've got various options here. "Gone, Father Fritz, my bar has gone through the mountain. It went right through. I heard it crash. Oh, do come and see." Now, if we look at our options, Jack's father was angry because Jack had lost one of their tools. Well, it doesn't seem to be angry at that point. In fact, it goes on later to say with a shout of joy. But also, "Oh, do come and see." Why would you be saying that if it wasn't a good thing? Jack was embarrassed because he looked incompetent. There's no suggestion of that. C, Jack was excited because it what implied about the rock. Now, it could be that because he's saying to them, "Oh, do come and see," and it went right through. Let's make sure we've checked all the others, though. Jack and his father were relieved because they could stop. Let me just move this over a second. They could stop work. Jack and his father were nervous because they didn't know what to expect. There's no real implication of that. I think the reaction of Jack when he does that and he has lost his crowbar of, "I heard it crash down inside. Oh, do come and see." And then the continuation of that and the finding the thin wall and the great cavern would suggest it's got to be C. Okay, there's some ones there that aren't suggested at all, but there's some obviously that do. Okay, right. Let me just go back. So they're the kind of retrieval questions that you might have. What I would like to look at now are some author questions particularly. Okay, I'm going to go forward to question 4 here, which is this one. So author questions often cause problems for people. The reason being is that you really have to think carefully about why an author has decided to do things that they've done. And it's not always a straightforward question to answer. So that's why it tends to be tricky. So let's have a look at our one here. Now, bearing in mind, we're hopping back to question 4 now. So we're going to probably be at the beginning, near the beginning, but we're going to check. Why might the author, so this is my question here, I'll just move this down a little bit. Why might the author have decided to include water references in the first paragraph? Now, this is quite good. It tells us which paragraph we're looking at. Always go back. If it gives you any reference to any part, don't try and work it out from the bit that they've put. And I'll show you why this doesn't work in other questions as well as we go on, but do not try to with these, okay? You need to go back. There's a reason why they're telling you to go back. Okay, right. Let's just have a look. So, why might the author have decided to include water references in the first paragraph? So let's have a look at that first paragraph. Let's find which water references we've got. We've got the winds at length were lulled, that's not water. Sun shot, the rain ceased to fall. Spring had come. Okay, so that's our first water reference. So I'd be underlining these as we were going through. Okay, because remember, again, your paper, you can decide how you do it. Okay, you can do the fact that you've got anything you want to with it. Okay, so you've got your water there. No prisoner set free could have felt more joy than we did as we stepped out from our winter home. We refreshed our eyes with the pleasant greenery around us and our ears with the merry songs of 1,000 happy birds and drank in the pure air of spring. Now, I would say that is a reference to water as well. Okay, so let's go back. Why has the author chosen to do all that? Okay, why have they? And is there any other part of the text that we can do, that we can use to help us with that? Because we don't have to just use that bit. That's just referencing to the part that might show what the author was looking at, but it doesn't mean that that is the only bit. So let's now have a look at our options. The heavy rain had recently stopped. Maybe the rain was still falling heavily. Now we know that that's not true. Okay. The rain had ceased to fall, so we can get rid of B. We know it's not going to be B, don't we? Okay. Let's get rid of B. Water makes a setting seem more peaceful. Well, that's possibly true, but there's not necessarily any reason for that. We maybe leave that for the moment. The family hadn't had a drink for a long time. There's no reason to think that that's the case. There's no reference to that. So let's get rid of that one. The family had found themselves on an island surrounded by water. Well, let's have a look. Have they found themselves on an island surrounded by water? They have been shipwrecked, okay, but they've been there a while. Okay, and the reason we know they've been around, they have spent the winter safely in Falconhurst, which is a home that they built. Okay, so that's unlikely the family have just suddenly found themselves on an island surrounded by water. That wouldn't make any sense. So let's go to our two options. The heavy rain had recently stopped. Well, if we go back to this bit here and we look at the first bit, they spent the winter, which the weather had recently improved, and it is time to find out what effect the winter storms have had. So they have had winter storms. They have had rain, okay? And we know for several reasons. Firstly, obviously, the winter storms had finally stopped, but the rain ceased to fall, spring had come. So clearly the rain had been falling a lot. And therefore, perhaps that's why we've got a couple of references to water in that. Okay, why it's important, because if you're living somewhere where the rain has just continued to fall all the time, then it's going to be quite important when it actually stops. Okay, so for that one, I think you would need to be going for A for that one. Okay, water makes a setting seem more peaceful. Well, possibly, but it's really talking about rain, and that's not necessarily the case. In fact, I'd say it's the absence of rain that's making it seem peaceful, so it's unlikely to be C for that one. Okay. Let's have a look at now some inference questions. So those author ones sometimes can be quite difficult, but just look at previous bits around it to see what you think as well. Right, I'm just going to move this so we can look clearly. Okay, so we're going to now move on to, and I'm going to move on to question 6 for some inference types of questions. Now, inference obviously means things that are not necessarily said out loud, okay, that are not necessarily in the text. You have to infer what they are referencing, and it might be to do with character's behavior, quite often is, or it might be in this case, something that they say about something, and what does that actually translate to mean for the people involved? Okay, so if we look at question 6, in a few days, It, the treehouse, that's in brackets because it's not part of the text, but it's to explain it, was again habitable. Okay, so we kind of have to know what the word habitable means. It says line 7. Go back to line 7 and let's have a look. Okay, in a few days, it was again habitable. Okay, so what does this actually mean? Let's have a look. So if we go back to it, let's have a look. Question, it was line 7, wasn't it, here? Our treehouse was our first care. Filled with leaves and broken and torn by the wind, it looked indeed dilapidated. We worked hard, and in a few days it was again habitable. Okay, so now let's see where we are with this. Okay, so our question was again habitable here. The treehouse was again habitable. What do you think this actually means? The family soon got used to the damage to the treehouse. The treehouse was rapidly transformed into a luxury home. It's not really any reference to suggest that, is that? The family was soon able to live in the treehouse again. The treehouse was destroyed again within a few days, or the treehouse quickly dried out by itself. Well, I think some of those we can pretty much get rid of pretty quickly, okay, if we're realistic about what we're looking at here, okay? So let's just see. Did they get used to the damage in the treehouse? That's not what it's saying at all. What it's saying is, if I just move this over a little bit, what it's actually saying is that their first priority was to fix the treehouse, first care. It looked indeed dilapidated, worked hard, in a few days it was again inhabitable. Now, because of that, soon got used to the damage doesn't make any sense, does it? Because that isn't what actually happened at all. But let me just move this over so we can see this a little bit better. I can try to. What we've actually got there is the fact that have they actually managed to, what have they done to it? They've worked hard, and in a few days it once again became habitable. So that would suggest, obviously, that it's going to be habitable. Now, it kind of requires you to know what the word habitable means, obviously. Okay, and if you're stuck with any of these words, and we will talk about this more as we go on, if you're stuck with some of these words, then I would look at what roots of the words do you know. It's got the word habit in it, okay, which generally refers to a kind of home, okay, and so therefore, in this case, it means that you can live in it. So obviously for that question in particular, it's going to be C. Okay, right, I'm just going to go back to it to show you the next one, okay? So I think we've probably talked that one enough. So that's an inference one. You've got to assume what it means, okay, by looking at the words that are there and then going from there. Okay, so let's go to our next one. So the next one that I wanted to kind of look at was question 18, which is another one where we've got a inference one. Okay, so let's have a look now at question 18. So again, we're kind of hopping a bit far ahead, but it's fine. Why did the family feel relieved after they had started their work? Okay, so we're on line 25 for this one. Why did they feel relieved? So first of all, go to line 25. It's telling you where to look. So don't not use that. You know, that is a help. 6 days, read the whole paragraph. 6 days of hard and incessant toil made little impression. I do not think that the whole would have been a satisfactory shelter for even our smallest dog, but we still did not despair and were soon rewarded by coming to a softer and more yielding substance. Our work progressed and our minds were relieved. Okay, why were they relieved? All right, so what we're looking at here, why did the family feel relieved after they'd started their work? Okay, let's go through the options. They knew they couldn't get any further and could stop working. Don't think that suggests that. They'd finally begun to make some progress, possibly. Somebody rewarded them for their 6 days of work. No, it says 6 days of work, but it doesn't say anything about them being rewarded by someone else for that. They realised they could fit their dog in the hole. That's not what it's saying. Now, if you were to look at that really quickly, you might see that, but be really careful. The actual phrase is, I do not think that the hole would have been a satisfactory shelter for even our smallest dog. It does not say they realised they could fit their dog in the hole and that was why they were relieved. Okay, actually what they're saying is they wouldn't even fit their smallest dog in the hole, but it's certainly not to do with why they're relieved. That doesn't make any sense. They had learned from experience, so it hadn't been a complete waste of time. That's not really it either, is it? Okay. I think the fact that they're relieved must be because they've begun to make progress. 6 days of hard and incessant toil made little impression, but we still did not despair and were soon rewarded by coming to a softer and more yielding substance. Our work progressed. And therefore it needs to be, that one obviously has to be they've finally begun to make progress for B. Okay. It doesn't say that they'd finally begun to make progress. It says the work progressed, but that's not necessarily why they're feeling relieved. You've got to infer that from the text. Right, there's just a couple more that I want to do, which focus upon word meaning. Word meanings are always a really big thing in comprehension, of checking your word, your ability not just to know words, but also to work out words that you might not know from the context. It's a really important skill. Let's have a look. The father considers, I'm looking at number 9 here. The father considered the damage inflicted on their property irreparable. Line 12. What does this word suggest he thought about the damage? Now, please don't just look at this. Look at the actual words in the line, as I promise you it will help you. You might know what irreparable means, but words can sometimes have different meanings according to the context that they're in. So if we look, the irreparable damage we had suffered made me resolve to find some safer and more stable winter quarters. So if we look at the question, the father considered the damage inflicted on their property irreparable. What does this word suggest he thought about the damage? Okay, so does he think it would be easy to repair the damage? Unlikely. Okay. If we don't know what the word irreparable means, let's think about what we could look at. The irreparable damage we had suffered made me resolve to find some safer and more stable winter quarters. Now, if it was something that was easy to fix, you wouldn't be looking for somewhere else to live. Okay, so that probably isn't going to work, and it wouldn't be easy to repair the damage. The damage was likely to be repeated. Don't know. What do you think? Does that kind of come across in that bit? I mean, it doesn't say that it's irreparable, and really irreparable isn't what that word is meaning in that. The damage could be repaired, but it would be difficult. Now, this is where having knowledge of that is probably a good thing to sort of work out. Now, it's got the word repair in, except it's not spelt as repair, but you could pick it apart to see that it's got repair in. And if it's irreparable, it's got that prefix at the beginning, which is making it the opposite. Okay, so then we're looking at it would be impossible to repair all of the damage. And that's the answer that needs to be. The irreparable damage we had suffered made me resolve to find some safer and more stable winter quarters before the arrival of the next rainy season. If that damage was easy to repair or could be repaired, he wouldn't be looking for somewhere else to live. So even if you're not sure what that means, a word irreparable, you can look at that element. And hopefully with that one, even if again you weren't sure what the word meant, there should be some you can get rid of to then have your best guess answer, as we've talked about before with the maths. Okay, let's just quickly do question 10. Okay, what is meant by quarters on line 13? Now, this is a kind of question where you are not necessarily expected to know this word. So let's just have a look at it. And this is because it's an older text. It wouldn't necessarily be a word. I mean, it possibly could be a word used now, but not a word that you would have come across a lot of. And it doesn't mean that you've split something into quarters particularly. Okay. to find some safer and more stable winter quarters before the arrival of the next rainy season. Now, remember, he's looking at the irreparable damage they had suffered, and it above it gives you details of the irreparable damage they had suffered in their home. So therefore, it made him resolve to find some safer and more stable winter quarters. Okay, what is meant by quarters? Well, if you look at what they could be, he's talking about where they lived. So sections would refer almost like if you're cutting something into quarters, which wouldn't really make sense. Lodgings, okay, would be a good one. Storerooms, is he looking at making storerooms? Not really. Or stables or beds particularly. It would make more sense. Winter quarters, he's looking at somewhere for them to live during the winter. So the main one that would work there would be B, would be your lodgings, would be part of your lodgings is somewhere where you lodge, like a house, okay, like it can be a lodge house. And that is the best fit with what quarters means. Right, I'm going to leave it there so that you can carry on. Obviously, we've been through a few questions there. I would like you to do up to question 20, okay? The reason being is that once you get past question 20, and I'm going to show you now what I mean, when you get past question 20, it goes on to more sort of grammar-ish ones. So if you can try and do up to question 20, okay, so up to, I mean, I've put 19 is kind of the beginning of the grammar ones, but you could have a go at 19 and then go to, we'll go from there on to question 20, looking at some of those grammar particular ones next time, okay? All right, I hope you find it okay, and I hope that's been useful. And we will move on to some different elements of the English test, as I said, into our next session. Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye.